Okay, so we are back in Fusion. Now, although I will be working on the still image, let's take a look at how to set up the frame rate. So to set this up, we go to File and Preferences and Frame Format. So in here is where we would set up our resolution. So in this case, I'll leave this at 1080 as that is the final resolution that I want. But the frame rate that I exported from Houdini was 24 frames per second. Okay, so we can obviously change this to some other settings if we want, but for me, 1080 is fine. Okay, so I'll save that for now. Now we have our simple setup. Let's begin to manipulate some of the channels that make up our image. So within this beauty pass, the channels that it contains are obviously the beauty, the normal, the position, the albedo, specular, transmission, z-depth, which at the moment is still called transmission, but I can rename this by pressing F2. This doesn't make a difference, it's just so I know what I am looking at here. And then below we have the sun and the environment light. So these are the lights that we exported as light groups. So to bring these in, we just have to look at our render that we created, and it will be a single EXR. And within the Format tab, under the channels, we can navigate to this. So we can choose, for instance, Sun R, Sun G, and Sun B. And that's the RGB. Nice. So these are the only ones that I exported because these are the only ones that I needed. But you could, of course, export as many as you like using the AOVs in Houdini. With these set up, we can go about manipulating them within the render. Let's say, for instance, I don't like the color or the intensity of the environment light. Now, if I didn't already have it as its own pass, I would first extract it from the beauty image, manipulate it, and then add it back in. Now, we already have the sun and the environment passes separately, so we could just add these together after doing some corrections, but let's become familiar with the channel booleans node. So let me just drop this down. This is the channel booleans node, not to be confused with the 3bool node here. And I'll shift and drag this in, and then bring over the environment here and plug this in to the foreground. So we have the background and the foreground. And within the channel booleans node, I want to subtract this. I obviously want to leave these guys as they are because we don't want to change the channels here, but I don't want to affect the alpha. So I'll set that to do nothing. Now, if I look at this, you can see we have removed the environment light. So it will look the same as the direct sun. Okay. Once I have done the changes that I want, I would just add them back in. So I'll just copy this and drag it in. And instead of subtract, let's change this to add. And now it goes back to how it was. Now we can use a color correct to change the intensity of the environment light to anything we want, and we could even, tint the color a little. So Let me just bring in the color correct. And perhaps I want it to be darker or brighter or maybe more blue. Nice. Now we can further compare these two in the viewport by using the A and the B options here. So we have A, we have the A / and the B, and we'll take a look at what these do. So if we switch to B, nothing's here because we haven't added anything in, but let's drop this guy in. And of course we need to set up the LUT again. Okay, and now if I switch to A, I have the before, and B, I have the after. So I can also use this, and this brings up a little slider here where we can see what it looks like by comparing the two. So make sure to grab this from the middle. If we grab it from the top or the bottom, then it rotates it. We can again hold in Shift just to snap to these angles. Nice. So since we are going to use the color correct a lot, let's take a look at some of the common options here. Beginning with the correction tab, we have colors, levels, histogram, and suppress. So colors is where we work most of the time, and we can choose to manipulate the overall color using within the masters tab here. Or we could switch to shadows, midtones, highlights, etc. and only affect those. If we want to see what the shadows and midtones look like, or the mask that we are affecting in this case, then if we switch to the ranges tab and switch to say shadows, we then get a representation, if we check out the color correct node, as to what is considered a shadow. So at the moment, a lot of the values within the image are quite dark, so a lot of them are considered shadows, and we can see there's a range here which indicates the balance between the two. So within shadows, if I want to tighten this up, I would just grab this guy here and drag them down, and you can see we begin to clamp the shadows to only the darkest values, which makes more sense. We can see what the midtones look like and the highlights. So the highlights should obviously be the brightest parts of the image. So let me just tighten this up. And now we can see the highlights begin to affect just these parts here. So this makes more sense. And if I go back to the color correction, then choose the shadows, let me first go back to results, so I'm not looking at the output here. And within shadows, choose to make some changes. You'll see we only affect the darkest parts of the image. And within highlights, we only affect the brighter parts. Awesome. Cool. So what I do want to do is drop a color correction just on this guy here, so I can affect the saturation of the sun. So let me just up this a little bit. It is quite sensitive, so just a little bit. And now we begin, if we compare the two. To get something that's a little more dramatic and a little more balanced. Now this is slipping into grading territory, but we can come back to that later. We'll just add some more blue. And up the gain a little here. So the graph is getting a little messy. Let me just arrange this. If I right click, I can change this to grid, which then means that these nodes will snap to the grid. And generally, it's good practice to work up to down, with the layers coming in from the left and the masks coming in from the right. So let's just arrange this. Nice. So next up, we'll take a look at the Z-depth channel and what we can do with that.